Hold on. Okay, now we're ready. Okay, sorry. Some of us are still sleeping in Alaska or Idaho, wherever we may be. So I just want to welcome you all to this special live event. Today is Antarctica Day. Actually, I think it's come and gone down if you're in the southern hemisphere or a few other places in the world. But that's okay. They celebrated yesterday, and Michelle and the team are raring to go and celebrate again with us. We'll be talking to Michelle Brown. She's a teacher, a PolarTREC teacher, which we'll explain what that is in a moment. And she's actually in McMurdo Station in Antarctica. So today is December 1st, 2015. And a few things before we get started and turn this over to Michelle and the team. We're using a platform called Blackboard Collaborate, and if you are joining us virtually today or following along in your PDF back home, there's a picture of the platform and it shows some of the features. And I'm getting feedback from somebody. Yeah.
So we pause for a second. Someone has maybe, oh, it's Michelle. Michelle, if you can close your mic for a quick second.
There you go. She's ready to go. Hold on, Michelle. We'll let you have the floor in just a second. So the slides will change in the middle. You can chat with everybody in the room. And I think the biggest thing you need to know is at the end we will try to have some live questions. And hopefully you can click on the talk button, open your mic, ask your questions to Michelle and the team, close it when you're done. In the meantime, if you have questions as the presentation goes along, please use the chat box to type in your question, and also technical issues as well, and we'll try to get you squared away. Most people have already introduced themselves. If you're just joining us, type in the chat box where you're from and how many people have joined you so we get an idea. Very quickly, I want to go over the program that Michelle is part of. It's called PolarTREC, Teachers and Researchers Exploring and Collaborating. And it's run by the Arctic Research Consortium of the United States. That's a mouthful. We call ourselves ARCIS. We're a nonprofit that's based in Fairbanks, Alaska. And PolarTREC is just one of the many things that ARCIS does. PolarTREC is funded by the National Science Foundation, and we take teachers from all across the United States and put them with researchers in the polar regions. And Michelle has been to Antarctica before with our program, and she got the opportunity to go back down again this year. And we're fortunate that she can celebrate Antarctica Day with us and tell us more about what makes Antarctica so special. Before I turn it over, one last look at how we do questions. Type them in the chat box, and at the end of the presentation, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. If you have to leave early today, that's okay. This whole event is being archived, and we'll share it with everybody that is registered as well as post the link online. And I think that's it. So I'm going to turn it over to the research team and Michelle Brown in McMurdo. So go ahead, Michelle, click on your talk button. And go ahead, Michelle. Are you there? Uh-oh, did we lose him? No, it's not working. Okay, yes. We are talking around the world here, so we'll wait for you. If voice, there you are.
All right. So yes, we are here in the McMurdo Station. It is December 2nd here for us, but we are still celebrating Antarctica Day. And I wanted to start by talking about this first image that we have up here. So we look at how humans are impacting the continent of Antarctica, specifically this season, McMurdo Station. And we're also going to talk about how humans have protected and are protecting Antarctica here. Our team is here, which I'll introduce in a moment, but this picture was taken just outside of McMurdo Station. You can see it's looking south towards Antarctica. Those mountains in the background are the continent, and the space between those mountains and where I took the picture is all sea ice. I like this picture because the reason our team is here is to help protect this pristine continent, but you can see tire tracks in the foreground. Humans have been here quite a bit, and that's where our focus is how humans are impacting Antarctica. So if you can go to the next slide, I'd like to thank a few people before we begin. So this work was done in part because of environmental safety and health section office of Polar Programs, which is funded by the National Science Foundation. Of course, PolarTREC, we thank you very much for getting me down here and helping us to support this project, which also is funded by the National Science Foundation. And we also wanted to thank Polly Penhale, who has done a lot to help support our research team over the years. Next slide, please. Can you hear me? Next slide.
Yes, we're on the next slide with Meet the Research Team. There's probably a delay in slides for you. Go ahead, just talk. It's a delay on your end. Can you hear me, Michelle? All right.
Looks like yeah, looks like
am I here still?
Has a weak connection. So Michelle, it might be you are there. You might want to call in because you were chopping up a little, and I see that your mic connection is low. You can keep trying if you would like. Okay, looks like you're going to call in.
All right. So if you can just let me know if you can keep hearing me. This is our Okay, so our research team is here with us right now. I'm Michelle, okay, great. I'm Michelle, as you can see in the middle. If you want to introduce ourselves quickly here. So,
yeah, Michelle, if you can hear us, let's see, yeah, please call in. Sorry about that, everybody that's just joining us. That's the way it is. We're talking around the world here, so sometimes the internet connection is not so great, and she's going voice over IP. So hopefully they will call in and just, oh yeah, she says she's calling in now. So hopefully we'll hear a beep in a moment and it should be a little bit clearer. In the meantime, you can look at their research team. And they have very nice t-shirts. And if you have questions as we go along, remember to type them in the chat box down below, and we'll try to get those to the team and interrupt them as we get them. Hello, did you just join?
Nope, I don't think so yet. But Janet, a great question coming in from Michelle Hanson's group. How is it possible to wear t-shirts and not large jackets? Looks like they're pretty well bundled in this photo. Maybe they have some snow pants on, but on the them are big red jackets. They might have just taken their jackets off to get those awesome team t-shirts in the photo.
Okay, I think we have. Yeah, we do. We hear you, Michelle. So just mute the sound on your computer so you don't get feedback. And we are on the slide of the research team. I don't know if your internet caught up with us, and we're ready to go.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, internet is not our friend down here in McMurdo Station, but we will continue on the phone. So I just wanted to briefly introduce our team. So I am Michelle, and then Terry.
I'm Terry Palmer, and I'm from Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi.
I'm Carl Green. I'm from Texas A&M College Station.
I'm from Texas A&M University, College Station.
And I'm Andrew. I'm also from Texas A&M University in College Station.
So our whole team is here, which hopefully if you have questions at the end, we have a wealth of knowledge to help answer those. But just to talk about why we're here celebrating Antarctica Day, if you could go to the next slide. Great.
Okay.
So Antarctica Day. Great. That helps to get the verified. So this is December 1st, 1959 was when the Antarctic Treaty was signed. So December 1st is a very proud day to celebrate Antarctica Day. And the treaty was it was signed so that countries from all around the world agreed to demilitarize Antarctica and promote scientific cooperation. And since then, protocols have been added to the treaty, including one that focuses on protecting the environment here, which is a big reason for why our research team is here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But before we talk about why we're here, let's first talk about where our research team is. If you could go to the next slide. Okay. For those of us who are not strongest in geography, we are sitting here at the bottom of the world, and we're in that first picture of the globe where that arrow kind of zooms in on, we're not actually on the continent of Antarctica. We're on an island just off the coast of Antarctica called Ross Island. And Ross Island is a really fun place to be. There's lots of cool things. There's an active volcano and penguin rookeries. And we are situated at the very bottom of a point. And if you look at the lower right picture, we're actually sitting in Crary Lab right now, which and talking to you from this small spot on an island off the coast of Antarctica. So just to give everyone kind of a sense of where we are here. Next slide. And we're here. We are not the first people to be here. People have been coming to this island, and specifically this area of this island, for a really long time. In 1841, James Clark Ross sighted Ross Island. That's why it's named after him. And then in 1902, Robert Falcon Scott had an expedition called the Discovery Expedition, which made landfall very close to here at Winter Quarters Bay, which we'll talk more about later, which is also now part of McMurdo Station. So humans have been coming here for quite some time. If you go on to the next slide. After the early explorers came here, in 1947 the U.S. Navy began coming here to explore the possibility of establishing a base. And in 1955 they indeed established a base here, and it became McMurdo Station. In this picture, you'll see a building in the foreground covered up with snow. That's Discovery Hut. That's the hut that Scott built in the early 20th century, which still stands today. And in the background, you can see a lot more structures. So over time, as the military built their base up, they added more and more structures, which is something that our team focuses on and looks at is how the infrastructure has changed over time. And if you go to the next slide, with all of the development comes impact. And so McMurdo Station was developed in a different era than we're in today. At the time it was common to throw out trash and not think about its future. And that's what happened back then. So there was a lot of waste and debris that was left out on the sea ice, which eventually settled down into the sea floor. So if you look at the picture to the left, that was McMurdo Station back in the 50s and 60s. You can see a lot of debris just sitting out on the white snow. That was just left there as waste. And as the ice melted in the summer, so we're here in the summer season down here and ice is slowly melting, that debris then fell to the sea floor.
The picture on the top right shows oil drums that were just sitting on the seafloor, and then the bottom right picture even shows a vehicle. So if something stopped working and they couldn't fix it, all sorts of things were just left here. That's a major reason why our research team is here, and we'll get into that. But if we go to the next slide, there's some more tragedy to discuss. There's other ways that in the past pollution occurred. The left picture shows sewage coming from a sewage outfall site, which was actually, it existed until 1998, and even still today, when there's too much in the system, some will fall out. The top right shows a landfill that existed in the 1970s, where when there was trash, it just went to a landfill here at McMurdo Station. And then the bottom right picture shows more debris that had fallen to the seafloor. So as you can see, we have come from a polluted past, and that is one of the reasons our team started doing this research. If you go to the next slide. The research team, are you there at the next? Yeah, great. The research team began because of a supply vessel that was used for the Argentine Antarctic program. It capsized in 1989 off the coast of, that was?
Out the Antarctic Peninsula near Palmer Station, Antarctica.
So it was near Palmer Station. It was a 435 feet long vessel. It was carrying 314 passengers, 81 tourists, and sadly in January it capsized, and the accident resulted in a 30-foot gash in the hull of the ship. And so a lot of the ship's cargo, including diesel fuel, jet fuel, gasoline, and other pollutants, leaked out into the ocean. And so that's when Steve Sweet, who sits with us today, as well as other members of the team that are no longer working on the team but are still here in spirit, have started evaluating the toxicity of the spill and monitoring pollutants in Palmer Station. And from that research, we've now we're now working with the research that we're doing here today. So that's kind of where our research started. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened after the spill is researchers from Texas A&M and other places in the United States came down to look at the localized impacts at Palmer Station from the spill, and there were some issues with the penguins and local fauna and flora was impacted. And so that kind of started Texas A&M's work in Antarctica.
So if we can go to the next slide.
Sure. And Michelle, there's been a few questions that have come in. I'll only interject if they're sort of relevant as we go along, but we can get back to them at the end too. One of the questions was, what did you discover so far? So I bet that question is going to come up pretty soon, huh?
Yes, we are going to talk about our results. That's a great question, though.
All right, great. And the next slide, research goals, should be up.
Yeah, and so I'll try to keep an eye on those questions too. But yeah, our research goals here, not only for this year, but so this is a long-term monitoring program where our team is trying to establish a physical as well as a chemical footprint of McMurdo Station. So looking at how McMurdo Station is changing over time as it develops, as well as looking at the levels of pollutants in the sediments and how those pollutant levels are changing over time. We also are interested in monitoring pollutant levels in heavily impacted areas. So our team focuses in places like those areas we showed you of historic pollution and making sure, monitoring how those changes are occurring over time. So this is the 15th year of our study. These members of our team have been coming out year after year here. Although for me, I came out in 2011, so this is only my second year. Carl's first year, but the rest of the team here are veteran researchers working in Antarctica.
otherwise known as Old Antarctic Explorers.
If you go to the next slide, slide 12. So just to give you an overview of where our team goes this season while we're here, every season they'll go to different locations. In fact, in the past they've returned to McMurdo Station, which is on a different area of Antarctica. But here we are. This is an area showing Ross Island where we're talking as well as continent. So if you look at the stars here, there's areas, every star has a location.
Let me just interrupt quickly. Someone who is online also signed into the phone, so please mute your phone. Okay, I think we're better. Go ahead, Michelle. If you can just repeat that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So all of the stars you see on that map are sampling locations that we have gone to in this season. And if you see Ross Island to the right, the letter M is McMurdo Station where we are now. I'll go through and identify the other stars as we continue. But if you go to, before we go into this, I want to talk to you about collecting samples on land. So if you go to the next slide. So all of those sampling spots that I just showed you are places where we collect sediments on land. And this is how we do it. Before we even go out to these sites, Andrew identifies the sampling sites ahead of time. He identifies areas of high human impact, and then he randomly generates sampling locations. So he gets a list of places with the latitudes and longitudes marked carefully, and then we use a GPS to determine where to go to collect our sediments. If you look at the top left box, you see someone in a red, that's actually Carl, in a red jacket wearing a pretty funny looking backpack. You all may be familiar with GPS as something that you use on your phone or in your car to get you to a location. Well, this backpack is a giant GPS, and it helps Carl and our team identify a very specific spot to sample sediment from. So Carl goes out and finds the spot that we need to take a sample from, and once he locates it, if you see the picture to the right, it shows Steve marking some notes down in front of a small jar and a little square area. So we find the location and we look at different aspects of it, like the slope of the land, the depth of the soil before it hits the frozen ground under it, and we take a photograph of that spot. And then if you look at bottom left and bottom right, Terry in the green then collects sediment into the jar, which then gets shipped back to Texas, where we look at the pollutant levels and the toxins in that sediment. If we go to the next slide. So one of the fun parts of our work is we also want to compare the toxic levels of sediment in McMurdo Station with control samples. We go to Cape Bird and Cape Royds, located on that map by the B and the R, and we are lucky enough because those are also penguin rookeries. So one of the fun things we get to see while we're out collecting samples are penguins. And then also there's a historic hut at those locations. One's from Shackleton and one is from Scott. These are historic explorers who built houses, huts, to do scientific work and keep their expedition team warm that are still standing today, which is really cool because if you are a certified hut guide, which I happen to be, you can get into those huts and get to carefully look at what it was like in the early 1900s out here. If we go to the next slide. So the other place that our team is going to out here are remote field camps. So on the map there, you'll see those are on the continent. They're in an area of Antarctica called the Dry Valleys. And the Dry Valleys are one of the most intensely studied sites in Antarctica. There's many reasons why they're studied so frequently. There's microorganisms that live in the area. There's two long-term ecological research
programs happening there. And in 1994, the dry valleys became an Antarctic specially managed area, which means that it's trying to help control and limit how humans are impacting that area. Our research team will visit these campsites to study and record the geochemical footprint, so the level of toxicity and what the sediment looks like, to make sure that the researchers there are not further contaminating the soil in that area. So if you look to the top right, you'll see our research team, Carl with his backpack, and Terry and Steve and Andrew. That's out at Lake Frixel, where the F is on the map. So we went out there not too long ago and collected sediments near that research station. There is also a glacier there, which was cool to see. And our team just got back yesterday from the Barwick Valley, where they spent an overnight trip camping and collecting sediment from a very special area to make sure that there is not contamination there. So it's a really important job that they're doing to make sure we understand these contamination levels so that we can track them over time. Next slide, please.
Sure. And Michelle, this is Sarah. There are some other questions that might be pretty relevant here. You talked about penguins. Someone was curious that are animals curious to interact with humans? And another question, does the terrain vary from place to place?
Those are great questions. I'm just seeing them now. So interacting with penguins is really interesting. One of the protocols from the Antarctic Treaty is that humans are not allowed to interfere with organisms unless, of course, it's part of their research, in which case they make sure that they talk about this with the Antarctic group and make sure everything's above board. So since we're not studying organisms, we are not allowed to go up to them and interact with them in a way in which we affect them. So you can see a picture of Carl there with the penguins, and although he's standing close, he is not interfering with their behavior. So you are not allowed to go right up to a penguin. However, they are allowed to come up to you, and in fact they are very curious about humans. They're not afraid of us. When I was here taking photographs, one walked right by me, which was quite startling because you don't expect to get so close to a penguin. I don't know if anyone else here has stories of being close to penguins here, but yeah, they can walk up to you. You cannot walk up to them. And then in regards to the terrain, it is very different in different areas here in Antarctica. Where we are at Ross Island is a volcanic island, so it's very rocky. The rocks are all volcanic. Whereas if you were to go over to the dry valleys, you'll see lots of glacial till. That's the dirt and sediment and rocks that get picked up when a glacier kind of bulldozes through an area. So the sediment's much finer, and there's lots of different rocks. There's valleys and mountains. And if you were to go further inland, it would be up on about a mile of ice, so that would be a much different environment.
Thanks, Michelle.
I can address.
I look for the moment, and maybe we'll jump back to a few more in a little bit. We'll let you keep going.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah. So this is a slide showing just how many sediment samples have been collected, and this isn't even all of them. If you can, every red dot there indicates a terrestrial or land sample. So our team is really making sure we understand just how healthy the soil in McMurdo is and how it's changing over time. That map is of McMurdo Station. If we go to the next slide, we also collect sediment samples on the seafloor. So if you remember from way back, I talked about pollution on Winter Quarters Bay, how in the 1950s they were dumping trash out on the ice. Well, so that's definitely something our team is interested in looking at. So the map to the left shows 3 areas at 3 different locations where our team goes out and collects sediments from those locations year after year, so we can look at how those pollutant levels are changing over time. We do this in a very routine pattern. The first thing we do is find the location using GPS, and then we mark
flags on the sea ice. If you look at that box in the middle top, those are black flags where the sampling location is under that sea ice. We then get a drill team to come out and bulldoze, or sorry, not bulldoze, drill a big hole in the ice, which we then clear out, and we drag a diving hut over. If you look at the bottom middle picture, we like to call that thing behind the piston buoy a tomato, which is a nice warm diving hut that we drag over that hole in the ice so that our divers can go down to the seafloor. So there's ice between the seafloor and the land here. Sometimes it's about 1 to 2 meters thick. I talked to a diver with us who said it can be as thick as 25 feet, which is quite a feat to dive through. If you go to the next slide, you can see just how we dive into that ice, through that ice. So Terry Palmer, who's with us, is one of our divers. He's also a benthic ecologist on our team. And then there's 2 other divers who work here in Antarctica, helping out all the researchers who study the seafloor. So they go down and dive and collect samples for a bunch of research teams, including ours. And we come up, when Terry comes up and the divers come up, they come up with these sampling tubes that you can see in the picture to the right. So they've pushed these sampling tubes into the sediment on the seafloor, and then they carefully pull out those sediment blocks into jars, which get analyzed. And they also collect sea organisms, which you can see in the bottom 2 left pictures. And we do that to see how pollutants are getting into the tissues of these organisms. So that's another thing that we're interested in looking at. If we can go to the next slide. Just like we look at control samples on land by going to the penguin rookeries and some of the field camps, we also look at a control sample in the seafloor. So a control is something that you do nothing to in science. It's something you can use to compare to the area you're looking at. So we believe there's much less human impact in an area such as Turtle Rock, which is about 10 miles away from McMurdo Station off the coast of Ross Island. So we do the same thing. We drill a hole, we put a dive hut over it, and we collect sediment samples from the sea floor there. I should say we do collect sea floor samples from 3 different depths, 40 feet, 80 feet, and 120 feet, to look at how the ecosystem is changing over those depths. The fun thing about the control sample for the seafloor is Turtle Rock around this time of year is a popular place for wet-elf seals, particularly for wet-elf seals and their baby pups that have been newly born. So we get to see a lot of mother and baby seals, which make quite interesting sounds. I'll try to post videos on the blog once I get better internet. But it's a really fun place to visit as well as to collect research at. If we go to the next slide. Hey Michelle, this is Sarah again. Can I offer 3 questions that are kind of linked together?
Please. Yeah, please keep interrupting. Those are great.
So here's 3 about the study that's going on. So 1, what if a sample is contaminated?
Yeah, so that's what do you mean if the research team contaminates the sample?
No.
That's a good question.
So yeah,
it's from Michelle Cross's group, and maybe they'll text in a little clarification. They said, what do you do if a sample is contaminated? One other question was, how do you minimize harm to such vulnerable organisms that are damaged when you leave footprints?
Yeah, do you want to take this or do you want me to? Okay, so one thing that we do is, especially in the dry valleys where there are microorganisms on the floor that can be easily damaged, is there's a lot of ways that you can minimize impact. So when our team goes out to those field areas, we stay in the areas that other people have been in the past. So we don't go into places people haven't been. We always use trails that are already, so there's marked trails where we are. So
anyone who's at that field site would hopefully stay on that one path so that their footprints don't go off of that path. And then also, for example, at Lake Frixel, there was a lake with ice on it, so whenever possible we would step on the ice instead of the sediment. I don't know if that answers your question or if there's other ways we try to minimize impact.
Yeah. Nope, that's good. And then, so how about one more, and just can you remind us, how long have you been taking action against pollution or studying this? How many years has it been?
So the project, when we started at Palmer Station, we worked for the Texas A&M group worked for 3 years, in 1989, 1990, and 1991. And the project at McMurdo Station started in 1999, and with the exception of a couple years, we've been here ever since.
Great, thank you. And just really quick, there are a lot of questions coming in with over 2,000 people that were registered. If your question does not get answered on the webinar, we will be sure to send the link to Michelle's journals so you can ask in that forum as well if it doesn't get answered today. All right, go ahead, Michelle. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm going to go a little quickly through these because looking at time, I do want to leave time for more questions. So just looking at research results, these are maps that Andrew created. If you look at those pictures, where there's red is where there's a higher level of pollution, both with hydrocarbons or lead. So as you can see, there are areas here at McMurdo Station, that's where this map is taken from, where there are higher levels of hydrocarbons and lead that we track over time. If we go to the next slide, this is the same situation on the seafloor. There were 3 sampling sites. You can see the red dots in Winter Quarters Bay in the top left. Yep, in the middle, that's where the sewage outfall site is. And then down on the right, you can barely see 3 tiny dots. That's where water gets taken into McMurdo Station. And as you can see, there aren't very many pollutants there. So the pollutants are staying where they've been, which is a good thing in a sense. They're not getting spread out into McMurdo Sound further. We've also found that there's certain areas, especially Winter Quarters Bay, where the concentration levels of pollutants are diminishing over time, which is an interesting outcome that is something that could be looked at further. If we move to the next slide, really quickly, I'm not going to go too in-depth with this due to time, but one thing that Terry Palmer looks at here is the amount of organisms and the diversity of organisms in the seafloor. So the more diverse the organisms, the healthier the environment, whereas the less diverse they are, the more disturbed, the more of a disturbed zone that it is. And if you keep skipping to the next slide, you can see that on the map where it's red, those red dots show a disturbed zone. So we're not seeing a lot of diversity in the organisms that live in the seafloor there, whereas the green dots are a healthy diversity. So the pollutant levels and the levels of diversity of the organisms that live in the sediment are matching up here. Where there's more pollution, the ecosystem is less healthy, and where there's less pollution, the ecosystem is healthier. I'm going very fast now, so I apologize for the speed, but if we go to the next slide, I just really briefly want to talk about some of the changes that have happened over time. So the U.S. Antarctica program is working very hard to manage and improve the environment here at McMurdo Station. In 1998, the sewage outflow was pushing out waste into the seafloor pretty constantly. And then if you look at that photo in 2011 and 2015, today, this picture to the bottom right was just taken while I was down here. It's a much healthier area there. They've stopped pumping waste into the seafloor. So we're now trying to protect the environment here at McMurdo Station and beyond. And so I'm going to talk briefly about a few ways that we do that, and then we'll have some time for questions. So if you go to the next slide, one of the really important ways that we make sure pollutants are not increasing here at McMurdo Station, that's a big thing I should have
mentioned is the level of pollutants in the soil here over time are not getting worse. They're staying the same. So the pollution and contamination in the soil isn't going away, but it's also not increasing. And one of the big reasons why it's not increasing is the team and the Antarctica program here try really hard to take all of the toxins and chemicals and process them and ship them back to the U.S. Instead of leaving them here. So I got to meet the manager of the hazardous waste group here. And if you look at the pictures here, it's George Ryan is his name. He manages all of that hazardous waste and makes sure it's labeled correctly and separated properly. And he puts them in these big cargo containers, which then get shipped back to the U.S. If you go to the next slide, we also process wastewater. So anytime you take a shower or do dishes, anytime that water is going down that drain, it gets processed and cleaned before going back out into McMurdo Sound. And we know that because we've actually tested the soils at the seafloor outside by that area. And then we also process water coming into McMurdo Station. So what you see a picture of there is a filtration system that helps clean helps take the salt out of the salt water as it comes in. And then all of that water is treated and cleaned before it goes back out. I'm going very fast, I apologize, but if we go to the next slide, another really big way that we make sure our waste is not kept here is we recycle. So the boxes on the left, those are sorting boxes found in every building here in Antarctica, in McMurdo Station. And then outside of the building are larger containers that help make sure that waste is separated out and recycled and sent back to the U.S. instead of staying here. So those are just a few ways that Antarctica and McMurdo Station is trying to protect the environment here, which our team is definitely seeing. I know we just have a little bit of time for questions, but I'd be happy to have our team answer some of the questions you all have.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. That was awesome. So for folks who would like to ask questions, you could still type them in the chat box. But if you'd like to ask a question live, you can raise your hand, which is over by the participant box. We will call on you individually. And it looks like a few classes are getting ready. I'll let a few more classes get ready and ask a question that was in the chat box. What happens to the waste once it gets back to the U.S.?
That's a great question. So from what I understand, it gets shipped to California. And there it can get, so the U.S. Antarctic program has bidders, and companies come and bid on how they are going to process the waste. And one thing I read about was that the Antarctic program likes to choose companies that are really responsible with how they're going to process waste. So those that get the waste and hopefully recycle it as best they can.
Can I add one thing I think is important? So you saw the picture of the sewage outfall. All material that comes into Antarctica, into McMurdo Station, that's the only waste that gets sent out. Everything else that comes in either gets consumed or gets sent back to the United States for processing. And Michelle didn't say, but about 70% of the materials that go back to the United States go through a recycling stream and don't end up in the landfill.
Great, thanks. So we have some classes lined up to ask questions, and I will jump back to people on the phone as well. But we'll start with Mr. Rose's class. Hit the talk button to speak, and then press it again when you're done with your question.
Okay, so my name is Farmer Chipuno from Mr. Rose's class. I had a question about one of the landforms that I saw in a paper, the ventrifacts. They kind of looked like they were formed similarly to a lake because of the cavity that was in it. I was wondering if the ice created the cavity in the rock, and if the valley that you're in right now used to have ice or water.
So the vent effect is actually created by the wind. So the wind is really strong in Antarctica. So you have a rock that sits at the surface, it gets blasted by particles. And that is how the vent effects get created. And I think your other question was there ice where we were today? Yes, so during ice ages, the ice has come in and out of McMurdo Sound. So elevations of a few hundred feet or more all had ice on top of them. And you can see what we call glacial erratics all over that indicate that material from other parts of the continent has been moved here.
And in terms of talking about vent effects, I believe you might have seen that posted on today's journal. There's an ice picture of the day about a vent effect. So if others are interested in seeing it, they can check it out on my journal page.
Great. And it looks like we have a question from Jillian Warson. Go ahead and press talk. Ask your question and press it again when you're done.
Hi, I'm Brandon, and I'm wondering, with the new species that you guys find, does pollution affect them, or does it affect you finding them?
We don't really find new species per se. Pretty much everything's been found before. But yeah, the pollution affects what animals are there, and yeah, basically some animals can survive in the pollution a bit better than others. So the ones that can't survive when it gets, they don't live in the polluted places, basically.
Thanks. All right. I want to check and see if there's anyone on the phone who has any questions, any groups on the phone that have a question. Okay, I'll check back again in a second. And a question from the chat box. Where does the lead come from? What do you do with the samples you get from lead pollution?
Well, we only know they're polluted with lead after we analyze them. And it can either come from using leaded gasoline in the area, because they use leaded gasoline at the beginning, and the buildings are painted with paint that has lead in them. And like the vent effects, it's windy here, there's particles in the wind, and that'll sometimes abrade the buildings and leave lead residue near a building. So I mean, we just note that it's there, but we don't, aside from remediating, a little 250 ml jar, that's the level of our remediation.
I think we should add that when we say there's contamination, that McMurdo kind of has about the same level of contamination, with the exception of a couple places in Winter Quarters Bay, that you would expect to find in a town of 1,000 people in the United States. So, like the red levels of lead on the map, even though they're elevated above naturally occurring levels, are actually very low. And they're not at a level on land that we would expect there to be any problems with the biology. They're not impacting it. So they're there, but they're not at harmful levels.
Okay, thanks. How about we'll go to Ann Brown for a live question. Hit the talk button to speak and hit it again when you're done.
Hi, I'm Ramon from Ms. Brown's class at Sam Early College High School. We have two questions. Does the research team get to, how long has the research team has been down there, and do they get to see their families?
So thank you for the great questions. Our research team came down early in November this year, and I'm leaving in 2 days. The rest of the team is leaving in about a week. So it's a little over a month that we're here. And sadly, we don't get to see our families until we return home. So that is a challenge of being down here, but luckily the community here is great, and our research team supports each other and makes each other feel like we're in one big happy family. So it is a difficult part of the job, but it's the price you pay to do research down here.
So one more question from that group. No? Okay. We're going to go to Michelle Cross and her class.
My name's Justin from Corning, New York, and I was just wondering if other countries take waste back to like their country from their base in Antarctica.
It varies quite a lot. I suspect that the United States is one of the better countries, but all countries that are in Antarctica have to operate under the Antarctic Treaty. And the treaty does require the programs to be good stewards of the environment.
Thank you. And a related question came in the chat box. Do any other U.S. bases like Palmer Station or South Pole, do they do any of the same work that you're doing?
Do you mean, if the question is, do they do sort of the same environmental work? We've done the environmental monitoring around Palmer Station too. It's very hard to do monitoring of the environment at South Pole because it's all snow. If the question was, do other bases recycle stuff? Yes, but the solid waste are handled differently in all places.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. We have about 10 minutes or so left. These are great questions, and there's many more to come. I hope the research team's ready for them. How about Megan Stern, if your group would like to ask a question?
Hi, I'm Diana from Namaste, and I was wondering, of the many threats that are facing Antarctica, which one concerns you the most?
Oh, that's a good question.
This is Dr. Klein. I think right now the biggest threat to Antarctica is probably overfishing. So I think you might have heard of Chilean sea bass. That is actually a commercial name for what is called a toothfish. And they originally were farming or fishing for the Patagonian toothfish. And when those fisheries were kind of overfished, they're now fishing for the Antarctic toothfish. And the Ross Sea region, which is where Ross Island is actually one of the places they're catching the toothfish. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns right now about Antarctic environment.
Thank you. Olivia, your group has a question.
Hello, I'm Macy from Lake Dallas. Do you guys do anything with air pollution?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our team just focuses on contamination in the soil and organisms there. So no, we are not looking at air pollution. Maybe someone from your school could eventually study that down here.
How about Joy-Ann's group from Alaska?
Hi, I'm Jewel from the Milk River School in Skagit, Alaska. What if the fuel pipes burst and the sewage pipe burst?
So what if fuel pipes burst? It has had, I believe there was a pretty big spill in when was the?
Yeah, so maybe I can. Yeah. There's been a number. So the United States Antarctic Program runs on fossil fuels. So that's how we run our vehicles. That's how we fly our airplanes. That's how we produce power in town is generators. And so there are fuel spills. They're mainly small spills, but if there's a fuel spill, there's a response team to try to contain it, and then they try to remediate the soil or other snow or what gets contaminated, and some of that gets sent back to the United States. But fuel spills do occur, and they do the best they can. But it's a very cold environment, and it's hard to work with. So, and sometimes they stay in the soil. So there was one we studied that happened in 2011.
We have a related. Whoops, go ahead.
If there's a little spill, they'll clean it up. They'll do the best they can, really. That's the answer.
A related question in the chat came from Jillian Warson's group. Do you know how many barrels of oil are used annually? And is there any relationship to changes in CO2 levels?
The program probably goes through hundreds of thousands of barrels a year. However, the impact in terms of the environment is a very small fraction of what the human beings put out in terms of fossil fuel emissions for the entire planet.
Also, I'm going to be taking a tour and meeting with people this afternoon. Hopefully I can get specific statistics on that. So stay tuned to the PolarTREC journal too.
Great. Thanks for that, Michelle. All right. Looks like Linda has a question. Linda's group. Linda, if your group is speaking, try again, and you need to be nice and loud if you were speaking.
Hi, this is Angela from Harrison. I was wondering, will you take pollution samples from the animals? Do you dissect the animals, or do you use small fishes?
Is it that when we take pollution samples from the animals, how do you take the pollution samples from the animals? How do we take pollution samples from the animals?
Well,
Steve Sweet answer.
We bring the animals back to the States and analyze their tissue. For the organic pollutants, we extract them in an organic solvent, and for trace metal samples, we extract them in acid. And we do that so that we can see if the contaminants are being transferred up the food chain. Does that answer your question?
I think that sounds great. We'll take two more live questions, and you've got the one about the 4-foot diameter diving hole. Great. And let's go to Emily Vassie.
Hello, Michelle. This is Emily Vassie from Lampeter, Pennsylvania, and we have a question. One of the students saw a sign on one of the pages that said, "Take a shower every 4 days." Is that what you have to do?
Yes, that's what's recommended so that we conserve water here. So there's recommendations, hopefully most people follow them, to not waste too much water. And if you think that's bad, at the South Pole you are only allowed to take 2 showers a week for 2 minutes at a time, since it's much harder to get water up on the ice shelf. But yes, there's ways to conserve water. There's recommendations to just use 1 paper towel to dry your hand. In fact, there's even a whole protocol on how to do it if you're interested. So there's all sorts of small ways here at the United States Station in McMurdo that talk about ways in which you can conserve both water as well as waste.
That said, the sign doesn't say a shower every 4 days. It's 4 showers a week, just in case you misheard that.
I see. Okay, we'll take one last live question and have a little more wrap-up. Go ahead, Olivia.
Hi, my name is Sheridan. I'm from Lake Dallas, Texas, and I was wondering, at nighttime when you look outside, is it easier to see the stars or not? Because I was wondering, since you're at the bottom of the earth, you might not be able to see them.
I didn't quite catch that.
Could you repeat the question?
Could,
being outside.
Was it about seeing stars?
Are you able to see the stars?
Could we try that one again?
Yeah. Are you able to see the stars?
Yeah, so That's a good question. So we're here in the summer. It's an interesting lesson in astronomy. When it's winter in the northern hemisphere, it's the summer season in the southern hemisphere. And because we're so far south, the sun doesn't set. Because the Earth is tilted, the way the tilt works with the sun, we always see the sun. In fact, there's a time-lapse video that I showed to even prove that. Because we're here in the summer, we can't see the stars. However, if you were to come here in our winter, which would be in June, July, August, you would get to see stars, and they would be a different, a fairly different amount of constellations than you would see in the northern hemisphere. The other cool thing you can see here in the winter is aurora, which are beautiful green waves of light that you see here too.
Thanks, Michelle, and let me turn it over to Janet Warburton to do our wrap-up.
All right, great presentation. Thank you, Michelle, and the team there down at McMurdo Station, and to all the classrooms and people that joined from wherever you are today for celebrating Antarctica Day. Just a few things that we wanted to share with you. Be sure if the questions didn't get posted that you go to Michelle's and the team Ask the Team section and post your questions there. And as Michelle said in the presentation, she's going to be doing some more on this topic today and sharing what happens when meeting some of the people that deal with the pollutants and things. So we look forward to her journals. There's lots of ways to join PolarTREC. We have more teachers going out this winter to Antarctica. So be sure to follow them. They'll be starting around actually in the next couple of weeks and going in through January. We'll have other PolarConnect events. And of course, we have a whole new crop of teachers that will be heading out to the Arctic this summer as well. Just register online for any PolarConnect events. And again, we want to thank our funders, the National Science Foundation, as well as all the agencies and universities that are funding this research team, and Michelle and team for doing such a great job. We will be shutting down the archive here in a little bit, and we'll be posting online and sending it out to those that registered in the next couple of days. And as usual, if anything comes up, give us a call or send us an email. And again, have a great day. Oh, be sure there's some links on the PolarTREC website to an off-site. The Association of Early Career Polar Scientists is tracking people that have participated in Antarctica Day. There you can go launch your virtual balloon. So make sure that your class goes to the virtual balloon site and put the balloons participating in Antarctica Day. And Sarah put the link up in the chat so you can follow it. All right, I think that's a wrap. And again, thank you for joining us. Great job, Michelle and team.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.